Hello, Rob. How are you?
Hi, Laura. How are you?
Well, looks like we already have some folks hopping on. Welcome.
Cool.
For those who haven't seen all of our incessant social media posts, we're going to be talking about kosher wine for Passover today. We're very excited. Rob and I both brought some of our new favorite wines under $25 to try and talk about with you. Um, you guys are so prompt that are here early. And I want to invite everyone also to ask questions in the chat. We do have a colleague of ours watching to see your questions. So any questions you have about either the wines we're trying or kosher wines for Passover in general or anything else, just leave a comment and we will try to get to it as soon as we can. So to kick us off, Rob, why are we even talking about wine at all for Passover?
Well, Laura, wine is integral to the Passover Seder. We drink, well, there's 5 cups of wine. There's 4 cups we drink at the Seder, and 1 cup is for Elijah. There's kind of 2 reasons. The symbolic reason is the 4 cups represent redemption. There's 4 passages in the Haggadah that talk about God will take us out of Egypt, reach out to us, stretch arm. Each one of those wine glasses symbolizes another act of God on our behalf for our redemption. The other short answer, the anthropological answer, is maybe cultural appropriation. The Seder is based on the Greek and Roman symposium, and symposium literally means drinking with. So at the symposium, you had wine and you talked, and you actually had 3 glasses of wine at the symposium. The rabbis in Talmudic times during the Romans added a 4th glass, which was the Kiddush. So that's why it's integral. And the other reason is because this is it's a holiday of joy. And what's more joyous than wine?
Right. I guess that's so interesting, the history. I guess that's also why we recline to the side when we drink, like borrowing from some of those symbols, perhaps. Interesting.
Oh, I mean, the carpus, what we eat, is based on what the Greeks and the order that the Greeks and Romans ate at their symposium. They were highly structured meals. And by the way, if you look at the Eucharist, which was celebrated around Easter, I mean, now it's celebrated every Sunday, but the original Mass was a feast that accompanied by wine. So this was probably clearly predating the monotheistic religions. Wine was an integral part of both religion and also life.
Right. Yeah, I saw someone added yes, and also in Roman culture as well. Yes, we've borrowed from all of the cultures in which we've lived. So fascinating stuff.
But of all the things we borrowed, this might have been one of the top 5.
Right. Definitely. And for those of you going to, visit others during Passover as well, we hope that this will also be practical so you can make a quick stop at your local wine store before the Seder and bring something delicious and interesting to share with others.
So, Lord, tell us what kosher wine is. Kosher versus non-kosher, kosher versus Passover wine.
Totally. So at a very basic level, just fundamentally, chemically, there is nothing intrinsically different about kosher wine than any other sort of wine. But because of the nuances of Jewish law and how culture has impacted various processes through which it's made, there are a lot of attributes traditionally that people associate with kosher wine. So just technically, a kosher wine essentially is a bottle of wine from basically planting into production until it's bottled, was observed by a Jew. There are, various reasons cited in Jewish law for why that is. We won't get into it, but it's basically a process that requires, within the traditional interpretation, like a Jewish person watching every step of the production. Now, historically in the United States in particular, that meant that Jews kind of had to make wine or, deal with the lower quality, sometimes usually sweeter wines that were commercially available. Concord grapes in particular in the 1800s and particularly late 1800s was a very popular grape and pretty much the only option available for everyone except the wealthiest Jews who could afford to import kosher wines from elsewhere. So when we hear kosher wine, a lot of people think of something like the classics, like Manischewitz is very viscous and sweet, made from those Concord grapes, or various other types of sweet wines that we'll talk about. But in reality, in the last 20, 30 years in particular, there has been a boom in really high quality kosher wines that are either produced by religious Jews who happen to, for example, some were formerly secular, and when they became religious, they still wanted to have good wine. And others are produced by wineries that, you know, regularly produce wine and once in a while will do a kosher run of their vintage. So kosher consumers now are blessed with a plethora of options versus 20, 30 years ago.
Somebody in the chat mentioned Shapiro's wine. I think that was the one whose motto was "Wine so thick you could cut it with a knife."
Sounds about right. Yeah, there's been a few iterations over the years, and there's nothing wrong with those if you enjoy it. But if you're like the two of us and also occasionally like to have, you know, a more complex wine, there are certainly other options that we're going to talk about. So Rob, also beyond just the sweetness, why historically have some kosher wines like kind of tasted a little bit funny to some consumers?
Well, there's within Jewish law, there's something within kosher wine law. There's something called Mevushal, which literally means cooked, and non-Mevushal. And for kosher wines to be handled by a non-Jew, they have to be cooked Mevushal, which means they're brought up to a certain degrees. If it's not done right, or the way it's been done in the past, it really does flatten out to my taste, and to a lot of people, it flattens out the taste of the wine. You lose a lot of the, in Mevushal wine, you could lose a lot of the nuance and a lot of the sparkliness of the wine, not literal sparkliness, but kind of the bright flavors of the wine.
Right.
But now I'm told, and I've tasted some Mevushal wines that are really good, and now they evidently have ways of flash Mevushal where they raise it up really high, lower it really quickly, where it doesn't seem to affect it. But I do think, my sense is that in kind of like the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm, even if you do Mevushal in the most technically advanced way, it doesn't help it. That's right. My sense.
Right.
Is that your sense too?
Definitely.
Yeah. There's, you know, nobody who loves wine is gonna like say, "Wow, I really, you know, gonna pursue a Mevushal wine." And you could tell. You look at the label; it'll say Mevushal or non-Mevushal. So, if you don't drink wine, either because you don't like the taste of wine, you like other things, or you don't drink alcohol, what are the options? We could talk about some of the options people have. Do you have to drink wine at a Seder? Are you not a good Jew if you don't drink wine at a Seder?
You definitely do not have to drink wine. Grape juice is a perfectly acceptable option. Also, there's a ton of actually pretty good sweet wines that aren't like that thick, viscous, syrupy consistency, but are nice and refreshing. There's a brand, Bartenura, that they have a classic wine, which I'm sure you can tell us about. Yes, the blue bottle, beloved by Jews and rap stars alike. Bartenura also they have I think it's a Malvasia that's really good. Same type of label, different colors they have. That's a nice, I think it's like 4% alcohol. It's pretty low. You can also, something I like to do sometimes is take grape juice and cut it with a little bit of seltzer. That's definitely also an option. But Rob, I hear you also have a cocktail.
Well, if you're more of a cocktail person, if you look on the Forward website now, there's two cocktails. One was concocted by Jay Sanderson here in LA, and it uses reduced grape juice and pisco or vodka, and some herbal bitters from Israel. And I haven't tasted it. Jay tells me it's delicious. It sounds like the balance between the tangy and the sweet and the herbal. It sounds perfect. He calls it Elijah's Cup. And if you really want to get ambitious, I have a recipe on the Forward website for an herbal cocktail, like a spritzer, like an Aperol spritz, but I make it with spring herbs from my garden that I macerate in alcohol and then add some sugar to it and balance it out with some bitter artichoke leaves. But that's, you know, that you probably don't have time between now and Passover to do that. but definitely look
Oh,
up a lot cut. And then, if you don't drink alcohol, there's many different kinds of grape juice. There's even dry grape juices now that use varietals like a Chablis or a Gewürztraminer, not Chablis, but Gewürztraminer and other varietals that are on the drier side and more sophisticated side, and you could use that to substitute. Some of these are made by, I think Navarro Vineyards makes a couple non-alcoholic grape juices that are really delicious. So what we're going to talk about for the rest of this event is tasting wine, tasting the best values in wine. You could spend, what are the options, Lori? You could spend hundreds of dollars on kosher wine, right?
yeah, it's basically like whatever you want to spend. To me, basically, in general, I say for the kosher market, there's really like 3 basic price points that you can tell a difference, and beyond that, you pretty much can't. There's I would say if you're spending less than $10-15 a bottle, generally you're gonna get it may be drinkable, it might not be. Between $15 and $30, there are actually a lot of really, really good, high value, delicious wines. And then, $30 and up, it's, there are just a million options, thankfully, of really good wines. Some I think are overrated, but you really don't have to spend that much to get a really delicious bottle. And not just a sweet wine. There's also some really interesting complex ones that are very reasonably priced.
I give a shout out at the high end, 50 and above, I think upwards of 100. Covenant Wines makes wine that can compete with any wine out there in the world. I think in terms of the kosher market, Covenant is really at the top. This Castel is also one of the great kosher wines out of Israel. Covenant is made both in the States, and also I think they just opened a vineyard in Israel. So if you're looking for high-end wines, which most people can't afford, especially because you're drinking 4 glasses in a night per person, there really are some great options. But we're talking about the more affordable stuff here, which will help you decide what to get for the Seder on Friday. Should I start?
Yeah, go for it, Rob.
Okay, so this is Bartenura. This is the famous Bartenura, as you said, beloved
on my wine rack also. I'm not going to open it, but I can match you.
I think you see the bubbles. It's fizzy. It's the 7-Up of wines. It's super drinkable. It's 5% alcohol. It's got a viscousness to it because it's very sweet. It doesn't have a lot of complexity of a great Italian Moscato, which is the same grape. But it's, you could throw this back. You could even mix it a little bit. You could cut the sweetness with a little bit of seltzer. There's nothing not to like about Bartenura. It comes in cans now. The only thing you have to know about with Bartenura is because it's under pressure, the cork is harder to get out than most corks. It'll take a little muscling. Don't give up. But the cork really is tight in a Bartenura. I've broken corkscrews with it.
Someone said they love 7-Up and that's why they like it. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. It's good.
I would only say the difference is Bartenura is a little sweeter than 7-Up.
Yeah, I think so. They also have, I just found, they have a rosé also if you want an impressive looking one. I'm not sure flavor wise. You can't go wrong with the classic. It's a really good bottle.
Yeah, I mean, there's peach, there's flavors in there, and it's just super drinkable. It doesn't really go with food, but it goes with hot weather.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. So speaking of hot weather, you're in LA, Rob. It's usually always beautiful weather, but it's finally today. It was 70 degrees in New York City, and the first wine I'm gonna share today is a Chilean wine, and it's actually, you can find it for about $10, which is very exciting. And there's a lot of really good kosher wines recently coming out of Chile. They just happen to, in recent years, have a lot of great production. Also Argentina. So this device that I'm using here is to get one glass out of a bottle at a time. It's called a Corvin. So
cool.
you don't want to open, this is the bottle. It's Casa de Cielo, which means House of Heaven. And it's a Pinot Noir, which is a nicer wine to start out with because Pinot Noirs are generally light-bodied. And the way I explain it is if you think of like skim milk versus whole milk, a lighter-bodied wine is going to have the mouthfeel more of like a skim milk, more watery, versus a full-bodied wine is going to feel a little bit thicker. So if you want like a good first summery, fruity wine, this is a great Pinot Noir. You can see it's like lighter colored. It's not that deep ruby red that you would associate with.
And this is like $10 a bottle?
Yeah, it's $10 a bottle. My go-to is kosherwine.com. This is not SponCon. They just happen to deliver, quickly. They give case discounts, and a lot of people live in areas that don't necessarily have like a dedicated kosher wine store nearby. So they're having sales right now also for Passover. So it's definitely light. It's a little bit acidic, which can be nice, especially for the first few cups as you're, having those just matzah and charoset sandwiches. This wine will not overwhelm those flavors or be
the delicacy of charoset.
Yes, the delicacy of charoset.
So Panda Berman asked, are there any kosher white wines you recommend? Laura, you tasting any white wines today?
I haven't today, but there's a great, the company is called Goose Bay. They have a really good Chardonnay it comes in a green bottle like a lot of white wines do. But traditionally for Passover, a lot of people, for various reasons, go with red wine. I think in Jewish law, most interpretations say red wine is preferable. And also if you're someone that does the symbolism of like taking out the drops of blood, usually people use red wine. But I mean, the Bartenura is technically a white wine.
Right. I would just say the Covenant that I was talking about makes a wine called C, and they make a white wine that I couldn't find. I wanted to put it into the tasting, but I couldn't find it. It's a little bit difficult to get, but that comes in right under $25 a bottle. I think you can get it for like $23.99 a bottle, and it's a really good wine. And there's some other good ones, but as Laura said, it's you kind of associate Passover with red wines because of the symbolism of the blood, and so I don't think, and also the Mount Hermon makes a white that's also really good, and that's like $14.99 a bottle.
Yeah, totally. Fun fact also, Jeff Morgan, the founder of Covenant Winery, actually introduced rosé to the United States. Like in general, rosé was not really consumed in the US before he came onto the scene. So if you enjoy your summer glass of rosé, you have Morgan to thank. Yeah, I think he actually wrote an entire book about rosé, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he's written a few cookbooks. I know that. Okay, I'm going to go up next, right, with the Barcan. Yeah. So this is a Petit Sirah. I'm sure it's coming out backwards for you all, right?
Yep.
Petit Sirah 2018, and this comes in at about $13 a bottle. And you can see it's pours on the lighter side, but it's got, I'd say, medium body, like a Petit Sirah. And this is widely available. And what I tried to find was some wines that you could just go into your local. This is from Bevmo. It's the only kosher wine Bevmo carries, so it's really easy to find. You can even Instacart it if you haven't done your Passover shopping yet. Mm-hmm. And I like it. It's kind of got a little lushness to it, and it's smooth, and there's very low tannins. And right out of the bottle, it's pretty easy to drink. And if there's any like dominant flavor, there's some dark cherry flavor to it, and it's a, I don't want to give you the sense that it's like a cab or something. It's a lighter wine, but it definitely is packed with flavor. And I thought for the price point, this is a really good wine. Like I'd really recommend it. And I guess maybe that's why it's so widely available. People like it, and it's just something very approachable. It is Mevushal, but it doesn't have some of that kind of dullness that Mevushal has. It kind of sparkles on the palate a little bit. So yeah, I would recommend it. It's a Barcan classic Petit Sirah 2018.
Awesome.
Okay, Laura, you're up.
I feel like you're doing the classics and the Israelis so far. I'm gonna do this time. This is actually an American wine that I just discovered, made in the Finger Lakes region of New
Oh,
York,
wow.
and it's so good. I made like 6 people try it so far. It's called Nature Screaming. It's very easy to remember. It has a very pretty bottle also, as you can see. This is a good gift to bring to a host or hostess. It's also about $20. And it's a natural wine, which basically what that means is it doesn't have anything added except for grapes and the natural products. There are a lot of additives that legally can be added to wine, especially on the cheaper end, to make the color better, make the taste better. So if you're someone that gets a lot of wine headaches, I find that looking for something without additives can sometimes help. You can see it has a really nice ruby-ish purple color. And this one is definitely a medium or fuller bodied. It's made from, I'm sorry for those that don't like my nerding out, but I love like the history of all the varieties. But it's made from a grape called Noir that actually was made at Cornell.
Wow.
Hybrid grape. And it has a lot of nuance and depth. And if you're someone that gets overwhelmed by kind of the more like oaky, rich tannins that a lot of maybe Cabernet, Cabs, and some of the other Bordeaux wines that, you know, you need to let them breathe a lot, this is not that wine. This is very easy to drink and smooth. It's interesting also. I opened them a few days ago, and now I'm going to try them again to see how they'll work for the second Seder. Yeah, they definitely have like this very nuanced, you get the more vegetable taste that you would find in an old world wine, while also having like the really good fruity flavors that you'd expect from a U.S. wine. In general,
Are there a lot of natural kosher wines? Is that like a new big category?
I think it's a new category. I don't know so many. For those who just hopped on, we're talking about this Nature Screaming natural wine from the Finger Lakes. Yeah, I don't think there's been a lot of consumer demand for it. I think recently in the non-kosher market also, like more organic wines and natural wines are becoming something that people are looking for. In general, just as a rule of thumb, when you're looking for, you know, you're overwhelmed in the wine store and don't really know what to grab, in general, wines from North and South America are going to be a little fruitier. Wines from Europe and Israel and kind of what we call old world are going to be a little bit more, they might have those vegetable tastes or soil tastes or a little bit more like nuance. If you just want something really fruity and big, you should go for generally a North or South American wine. So I definitely recommend, if you're looking for something new and fun and local, this Nature Screaming one. It's a good conversation starter also. So.
And you got that at the kosherwine.com?
Yeah, I got this at kosherwine.com, and they recommend serving it below room temperature. I just am lazy and didn't stick it in the fridge in time. It's good both ways. This bottle is not Mevushal.
Hold up the label one more time, Nate.
Yeah, it's called
Nature Screaming.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cursive.
Noted.
Picture.
It looks like a choking rooster on the label.
I think it's supposed to be a paint smear flower.
Okay. Is it exploding iris or something?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
I'm next.
What's next for us, Rob?
I felt obligated, since I'm here in California, to do a California wine. And they had Wine Stock, which is from Paso Robles. And this is a cab. It's a 2019 cab. It's also Mevushal. And it's on the light side for a cab, you could see. And this is actually the first time I'm tasting it. So let me give you some first impressions. I would just say, like, smell-wise, there's something a little different.
Mm-hmm.
Burlap is what I'm getting from this. This is Paso Robles, maybe by way of Bakersfield. Either, I've had wine stocks that are really good, and they're venerable kosher wine here in California. I think they started in Napa. This is a Paso Robles, which is south of Napa, north of LA, about 3 hours. But this wine has something there's strong tannin. There's something a little rough about it. Even I know it's a 2019, but it's not a fruit. It's kind of leathery and wet burlappy. So I'm gonna say, steer away. This is a $25 bottle of wine. So I will keep my mind open. Maybe it's gonna get better after a few sips, but
yeah, so let it breathe, and we'll get back to it. Which wine is this again, Rob?
What's that?
Which wine is this again?
This is a Wine Stock Cellars Select Cabernet 2019.
Okay. So I saved my absolute favorite wine for last. This is one that I use as a conversation starter, as a good gift. It's from Jezreel, which is an Israeli winery. It's the Jezreel Adumim, which means reds, basically. This is a 2018 bottle. And Jezreel is an Israeli winery that what I love is they use a lot of classic Israeli grapes. So again, we said old world, which includes Israel and Europe, generally have like more complex minerally flavors than the fruitier New World wines. And this is no exception. You can see it's like a dark ruby, even purpley color. This has been open for a few days. The first smell that hits you is just like baking spices. This is definitely not the first glass you want for your Seder. This is like later in the meal, once your mouth has adjusted to the acidity and complexity of wine. A lot of baking spices, and it has the oakiness of it's been aged in oak barrels, but it doesn't have that harsh. Sometimes you'll feel like a velvety feeling on your tongue, or even like it feels like a sandpapery feeling. That is the tannins, which come from both the skins of the wine and the barrels themselves. So this is smooth while still having those like deep oaky flavors. And it uses a grape called Argamon, which is a quintessentially Israeli grape that was revived, and I believe Barkan Winery uses it in a lot of their blends. But Jezreel, this is a great bottle because most of their wines, like Covenant Winery, which we mentioned earlier, Jezreel, a lot of their wines are more boutique and higher end, and you can't get for under $35-40 a bottle. But their red blend, and this is not the first vintage I've had. They make really good blended.
Where's their vineyards? Do you know?
The Jezreel Valley in Israel.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, and this is a good one that if you are going somewhere that you're with someone, like I really like red wines, I like Cabernets, I like these big bold flavors. This is something a little different that you can bring that I wouldn't say it's super fruity, but it has like the deep richness. I know leather isn't generally a flavor that we like in things, but it does have like a leathery, oaky, almost like how a library could taste in a good way. So it has some of that complexity. And especially if you're looking for an Israeli wine, Jezreel is a good bet. And this wine is also not Mevushal. Rob, someone asked in the chat, are there any things that you can look on the label to like quickly identify if a kosher wine is good?
Well, I check whether it's Mevushal or non-Mevushal because my preference is for non-Mevushal. I just think they have a lower bar to get to good. I think getting over the Mevushal thing is tough for wines. So I check that. It's not a deal breaker if I hear a wine is great, but I look for that. Otherwise, no. I mean, I look for, you know, if it's a good vineyard with a good label, I'm open to it. What about you? What do you look for?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. For me, it depends on the purpose, right? If I want just like a crowd pleaser wine, um, a lot of the blended reds are really good. There's also one called Seagull Fusion, is usually $15-20. It's a
Huh.
blend of different reds, because usually what you get when you have a blended red wine in an ideal scenario is the winemaker takes like grapes that work in good combination with each other, rather than just trusting that each year's crop is going to produce with one varietal, with one type of grape, the exact flavor profile that they want. And some of the classic wines that are very famous, such as you've probably heard of, like a Bordeaux blend, like that's a blend of different grapes that go well together. So if I'm looking for just a crowd pleaser, usually look for a blended red. Yeah, and
By the way,
yeah,
I feel the same way. I feel the same way about Scotch.
yeah,
I actually like blended Scotch. I'm not like a single malt snob.
yeah. No, I think that generally it leads to good, easy drinking wine. If I'm bringing something like, let's say I'm having like an outdoor meal or some like lighter foods, I usually will look for either a, you know, white wine or a lighter bodied wine, which again just means a bit thinner feeling. Pinot Noir is a very classic lighter wine. And if you have a good local wine store, it definitely pays to, you know, just ask. And yeah, so there's not an easy, quick cheat code, unfortunately, but you definitely don't have to spend like a crazy amount. If you've never heard of the winery or the bottle, you should not spend a crazy amount before you know that you like it.
No, and I think some of the ones we liked the best today, which was the Jezreel $25, the Nature Screaming, the Barcan, which is $10 a bottle, you
Yeah.
know, on sale, $11 a bottle. You could do really well.
Yeah.
I retasted the wine stock. I still think it's a little on the challenging side. It's not as off-putting as it was now that it's got some air and my palate's adjusted to it, but it's challenging.
Yeah.
So, how should we conclude this, Laura? I guess I had one question for you. Something you said in the very beginning. You know, when I was growing up, there was basically like Manischewitz, and then occasionally like a decent, like a wine stock or something they would, or Geffen was a big one that would try to, Hagafen would try to come out and do something worth. But now there's just been this explosion in the kosher wine market. So why do you think that is? Like, why do you think suddenly kosher wine has so much variety and so much quality?
I think just the kosher consumer has gotten a lot more sophisticated of a palate, but B, they've realized, especially in the era of social media, just the plethora of options that are out there. And when you have, you know, larger Jewish communities, you're able to afford, for example, sending a kosher supervisor to a vineyard and having them do a run of kosher wine. So I think people just have developed a taste for nicer wine. I think also you have a lot of people who grew up secular and then became religious later in life, starting in, you know, the 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
And a lot of people came in and were like, wait, this is the only options I have. So is this sweet?
Same in the food world. Same in the kosher food world. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the people revolutionizing kosher wine had a background like that, or have worked in the non-kosher wine industry before, and are, you know, gracing us with what they've learned on the outside.
Yeah, definitely that fits with Jeff Morgan and Covenant. Okay, well, this was really fun. I'm mildly buzzed because I haven't eaten a lot today, and it's only 3 p.m.
It's like the Seder. You start basically on an empty
Right.
stomach.
Right, but that was kind of that was the hope, and that was the point. If anybody has questions, or you know people with questions, I think you could always email Laura at Adkins, ADKINS, / or me. And then we have a lot of kosher for Passover food recipes at forward.com, a lot, and there'll be more in the next couple days. Some great recipes, great chicken soup. We have a Zabar's chicken soup recipe. So anything else you want to say, Laura?
That's pretty much it. Yeah. L'chaim, Rob. I will see you
L'chaim.
on Zoom. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Thanks. Happy Passover, everybody. Bye.